Crisis in Potter Valley as they plan to remove the dam that brings water to ranchers and farmers, much in need of it, and all that with two special guests tonight. We look forward to that on tonight's episode of the California Underground podcast starting right now. What's going on, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the California Underground podcast, the most trusted podcast for all things California politics. We have a great show for you tonight. We have two special guests, including Tate Bennett and Keely Covello, who's been on before. We're going to be talking about the Potter Valley Dam regarding water to farmers and ranchers that's much needed. But first, if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, like, share, review. All that stuff helps with the algorithm. And let's welcome in our guests, Keely and Tate. And of course, as always, my trusty co-host Camille is with us here tonight as well. Keely and Tate, welcome to the program. How are you?
Doing great. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Awesome. So let's introduce Tate. You go first since you're new to the show. Why don't you introduce yourself first, and then we'll go Keely.
Hello. Thank you guys so much for having me out here on East Coast time, but I'm always awake, as Keely knows. Had some coffee around 10 p.m. our time, so rocking and rolling. So Tate Bennett, I am the Director of Rural Policy at the America First Policy Institute. We have a very strong chapter out in the state of California, but I, for better or worse, I'm at headquarters here in Washington, D.C., DMV area. And we were founded originally by Brooke Rollins, who's now the current Secretary of Agriculture. We've had 80 from our bench go on to serve in the current administration. And the one thing I'll leave you with there is rural policy, preserving farmland, the next generation of farmers and ranchers is of the utmost importance to not just AFPI, but my work. And it seems like the current administration. My background, we were just sharing before, I'm from a rural town. I grew up on a farm in Shelbyville, Kentucky, found my way to DC after college, met my husband, who's a New Englander. I won't even go there. And so now I'm working on rural policies close to my heart, but in Washington, D.C. So thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Keely, welcome back to the show. How are you? Why don't you introduce yourself to everybody?
Good to be back. Phil and Camille, thank you for having me. I'm Keely Covello. I'm from Northern California, living down here in Southern California, close to Camille, I think. But yeah, rural roots, and I'm an independent journalist focused on ag issues, and there's been a lot of ag issues in California lately. So happy to be here to talk about this one.
Great. So, I mean, let's dive right into it. I have been following a little bit of the Potter Valley Dam, and I think, Keely, you actually brought this up on our last show when we had you on about Potter Valley, but we were talking about the Point Reyes Ranchers, which is a whole nother issue. I think our listeners would love to hear maybe a rundown. I don't know, either Keely or Tate, whoever, or both of you can go in turn and tell us what's going on in Potter Valley. Like, first off, where is Potter Valley? Because California is a big state. Some people on our team didn't even know where Potter Valley was when they asked what county it was in. So, embarrassment to them. But tell us what's going on in Potter Valley.
Well, they're missing out. Tate probably knows this issue about as well as I do now. She's got to come visit us in Potter Valley soon, hopefully. But Potter Valley is about 3 hours north of San Francisco in Mendocino County, kind of inland Mendocino County. Really beautiful, very, very aggy. The part of California people don't know exists. I think most Californians down here in the South think you're in Oregon by the time you get 3 hours north of SF. But lots of cattle, lots of sheep, pear trees, some wine grapes, as Sonoma and Napa have become more of a tourist destination. The wine grape industry has grown out there too. Lots of hay. We used to be a big center for logging, but that's changed over the last 100 years or so. Still got some redwoods. It's a really beautiful part of the state, kind of famous for cannabis too, black market cannabis, part of that Emerald Triangle up there. But my background is really in cattle ranching. That's how I grew up. My dad is a ranch vet. And the community I grew up in, Potter Valley, really relies on this project, this 100-year-old hydroelectric dam project now owned by PG&E. which I'm sure your listeners are familiar with PG&E for many nefarious reasons. But of course, PG&E is the monopoly up there that provides our power, and they have owned and operated Potter Valley Project since, I believe, 1920. They took it over from the Snow Mountain Power Company, and it's basically designed to provide clean energy, but it has over time become very invaluable to the area for water storage as well. The project involves two dams connected by a tunnel in Potter Valley. These reservoirs have helped us fight some of the state's largest fires. The water supplies about 600,000 people from Potter Valley down to Marin County, Bodega Bay. So it's a very important infrastructure that is slated for removal by PG&E's goal is 2028. And we started to feel the effects of that just within the last few weeks. So we've been trying to get the word out about that. Even some people in the area don't really know what's coming down the pike for them in terms of losing their water.
Tate, anything to add to this summary?
No, something and Keely, you've experienced it your whole life and career in ranching. Folks often forget that, at least out in the rest of the country, that California is such a important supply of, what is it, our nation's salad bowl, between the fresh leafy greens and produce. You mentioned pears. I'm from Kentucky. I wish we could produce what California does on that scale. And to hear that your state is not being helpful, it's just really disheartening, especially in an era where we're trying to bring back a rural revival. So I guess I would just underscore this part of the country is so significant to our national food security, and it should be treated as such.
The question I guess everyone's going to be asking is, so why what is California's plan, and why are they taking down this dam? Like, I'm sure if you said like it's because of some endangered fish that can't figure out how to swim, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense for California. But what is the rationale for the state to even screw this up?
Yeah, well, it kind of depends who you ask. PG&E will say this is aging infrastructure that is not financially viable for them to maintain anymore. But as I've researched this, I think you really can basically attribute it to what you just said, Phil, which is the Endangered Species Act, which has wreaked havoc on a lot of our industries in Northern California, in agricultural California. There are some very powerful NGOs like CalTrout, Friends of the Eel, some of these, river restoration, quote unquote, NGOs who've been pushing for dam removals, for salmon restoration, for trout restoration. So I think that would be the real reason. And I think our governor, this is my opinion, but I think our governor is obviously very ambitious, and he has some aspirations for 2028. And there's an article I can send you, Phil, from the AP a couple years ago, where he's quoted taking credit for dam removals, including the Klamath Dam removal, which some of your listeners may be familiar with. That was recently completed in far northern California. He's on a mission to remove these dams and restore free flowing rivers for the salmon, for trout. I would argue that they don't really benefit fish populations, but that is at least the stated purpose, the goal of these NGOs, what they want to, I think, increase his green bona fides and basically improve his profile as the most environmentally conscious governor in America ahead of his 2028 attempts. That would be my opinion. That's what's really going on. Tate may have more to add. She knows the inner workings of these things.
Well, I can't begin to explain California politics. However, we did look up the PG&E project description prior to hopping on with y'all, and sure enough, it says that the deconstruction would benefit salmon and steelhead fish recovery. Yes, so you nailed it. I guess these are some water averse fish. I don't know. I'm sure it's more complicated than that, but classic example of California priorities, unfortunately.
I have a question, and I'm going to sound probably really ignorant on this because I sincerely know nothing about the fish, etc. I understand, or at least according to them, that they're trying to bring back this particular type of salmon, and that allegedly, with the removal of the last dam, they like saw it flourish because the salmon got to swim upriver and lay all their eggs. Why? And while I'm all for natural resources, why can't we have commercial salmon farms in California to bring back the so-called endangered salmon?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're really looking to restore the original fish migration patterns that we had before these dams were constructed. My argument is just, 100 years later, these dams are part of the ecosystem. This is part of the wildlife. This is part of the national forest and the natural land up there. The reason that we've lost, I would argue, so many of our fish in Northern California has more to do with global overfishing. You go not too far off the coast of California here, there's massive Chinese trawlers overfishing our oceans. There's a lot of pollution. I was reading an article the other day about how much sewage is in the San Francisco Bay. Of course, salmon have to swim through that to get to our rivers. So I'm just not convinced that these dams are what has caused such a downturn in our fish populations. It's just like anything else in California. I think it's often easier to blame rural people or people who don't vote the right way or people who are kind of out of the sight and mind of our big cities for these natural problems, when really they're kind of the last stewards of these areas. And so, yeah, I mean, commercial fishermen definitely have an opinion on this, Camille, and they'll talk about how Klamath, which was, these Klamath Dam removals were touted as this huge benefit for fish populations. That's just not the case. Instead, they released tons of sediment and silt into the water and killed off salmon and spawning eggs and damaged their migration patterns for generations to come. So I think you're completely right. There's other solutions that we should be looking into, and of course we all want more fish, especially people who live out there. We value our salmon more than anyone. Of course we want better wildlife. We're all hunters and fishers, and this is something that's important to us. But killing off our water and way of life, we just don't believe that that's the way to restore salmon populations.
And Keely, you might be positioned better to speak to this, but this specific water system. So farmers and ranchers have been reliant on it, specifically here, for over 100 years. Would it be helpful maybe for the listeners to hear just how dependent they are on this specific system, and if it's ripped out from underneath this, like what's at stake?
Tate stole my next question, so I'm just gonna sign off,
Sorry.
everyone. I think Tate's got this. All right, you girls have fun. I'm out of here.
That's a great question, Phil, and to Tate. Yeah, no, I mean, I can't overstate how important this water is, especially to Mendocino and Lake counties. Did I lose you guys? My screen just changed share.
Nope, you're still here.
Okay, good.
We were just giving you the spotlight.
You're giving you the spotlight.
Oh, sorry to interrupt that. No, but I mean, it's very important to the ranchers and farmers in Mendocino and Lake County. I know Sonoma and Marin will be fine. They will find other water options. They're already talking about building a dam in Marin County to make up for the water that they're going to lose when they tear out the dam in Mendocino County. It's called the Sula Julie Dam, and they're looking at flooding out ranchers in Marin County to build a dam to ensure that Gavin Newsom and his neighbors have a water supply once they dry up the water that they're using in Mendocino County. So, yeah, they're going to be fine. But the farmers and ranchers, the real working class ag folks of California who are in Lake and Mendocino counties, they won't be. This is their only source of water. This was a dry valley before the dam was built. And I think it's important to note, because this comes up a lot, the dam system isn't stealing water from Humboldt County. You guys know, you're Californians, Phil and Camille. We only really get rain in the winter here. We're a Mediterranean climate. So most of that water that comes through in our wet and rainy season would go straight out into the ocean. Less than 1% of 1% is captured by Lake Pillsbury, the Potter Valley Project, and it's stored there for summer. So we have plenty of rain in the fall, we have plenty of rain in the early spring, we have plenty of rain in the winter, but during the summer and late spring and early fall, we have none. And we need to, and our ancestors planned ahead to have water for those times, and that's what farmers and ranchers rely on. Some of the folks I was interviewing and sharing on my channels who were hit by this water curtailment a couple weeks ago, they were right in the middle of harvest, right before fire season. Water is super critical to them right now, and PG&E cut their water. That's really just kind of foreshadowing what's going to come permanently when they rip these dams out. So, yeah, not to go too long winded here, but this is just, there's no upside to this. Nothing about it makes sense unless you're trying to score political points, in my opinion, to appeal to urban residents who want that kind of virtue signaling.
I'm going to put on my tinfoil hat for this next question. But do you think that a possible reason behind this is a land grab? Like they hope to remove the water and farmers and ranchers are forced out, like we're seeing with Point Reyes. They're trying to force them out there. And of course, climate change, cattle are bad for the environment, all that. Do you think that they're hoping to remove the water, thus pushing out the farmers and ranchers and then getting a quick, cheap land grab?
I mean, I would put anything past them. Frankly, I really wouldn't. I haven't seen specific evidence of that, but I mean, can you really question, is anything beyond our California politicians at this point? I don't know, Tate, maybe you have an opinion on this after diving into a while now, pretty in depth, but.
Okay. I wouldn't necessarily call it, with the current administration, a land grab by the current federal government per se. Like when I hear land grab, that's what I usually gravitate toward, just because I'm so familiar on the DC federal policy side. We've actually seen in this instance just last week, the Department of Interior filed a motion to intervene on the water variance changes that have been sought of FERC by PG&E. So I think that's a good sign that gives non-federal land grab. That being said, is it a land grab when the state just sort of abdicates their responsibilities to protect resources for farmers and ranchers and just let it fall by the wayside? So maybe not necessarily a land grab, but sort of an abdication of responsibility on the state level is how I see this one. But totally in the same sort of vein of government not acting as a hand up to protect like one of our top 6 rural employers, which is agriculture, which you would think they'd be motivated to do that.
You brought up a good point, which is I was reading Keely's blog today, and everybody should go check it out, AmericaUnwon.com. As much as a policy wonk I am, the Department of Interior got involved, and you just brought it up, and I don't understand. I mean, I guess it's good the feds are getting involved because they know this is a problem. So maybe kind of walk it through like a 5-year-old. Like what are they doing? What is the Fed doing or the Feds doing that could be helpful to us? Is it helpful? I don't know. I was trying to figure that out. I'm like, I don't really understand. This is like different language to me.
Keely, do you want me to take a stab, and you can totally correct me on any of the process
I feel
points?
like this is your wheelhouse.
It's
go for it, Tate.
So 9 times out of 10, I would say, government is absolutely never the answer. However, I mentioned in the beginning, farming and ranching as its preservation is of the utmost importance to our founder and former leader, who's now the Secretary of Agriculture, who is there on a mission to preserve family farms. I don't think Secretary Burgum, he is any shyer of that priority. He's from a rural state. I'm sure he's experienced a lot of issues when he was governor of North Dakota, needing to protect the variety of farms and ranches they have up there. And so when you see a federal entity move to intervene in FERC, so Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, which has immediate jurisdiction over this issue right now, because they're in charge of approving the deconstruction of the dam. So they're an independent agency. Now, their commission is appointed technically by the president in consultation with the Senate. They're sort of in this independent lane where, yes, they're serving who they were appointed by, but it's a little bit more free flowing as far as decision making. And so when you see a department like the Department of Interior move to be like, hey, we actually think you need to take a look at some of the impacts these water flows being cut off could have to the public. I think best interest of the public. We want to be involved in this. I actually think that's a good sign, especially based on the current direction on other decisions that the Department of Interior has been making to preserve local family farms, taking a look at Point Reyes. With this being a priority for the administration, I think it's a really good sign that they move to intervene on some agency that doesn't necessarily have to be beholden to the administration. That being said, with the caveat, I don't think President Trump has any issue sort of reminding who the independent agencies are appointed by. So with that one caveat.
Yeah. If I could just add, Phil, I think, I totally agree. Government is not the answer. I think we all probably feel similarly. But the problem with this specific issue is it's not just a private business running these dams. As you guys know, PG&E is state regulated, and the history of corruption with the California Public Utilities Commission is just, it's pretty sordid. So in my opinion, and again, this is just my opinion, but I have dug into this as much as I can. I'll keep digging into it. But I think there was some type of quid pro quo with PG&E and Newsom and some of those CPUC appointees to try to get this dam removal pushed through for Newsom's political profile. That's, again, my opinion. But for us in Potter Valley, for those of us in Mendo and Lake counties trying to get some kind of help on this issue, our only hope has been the feds, because we do not expect any help from the state. So this isn't just a private business with, facing some kind of government intervention, which I think would be problematic for a lot of reasons. This is a business that makes massive donations to all of our politicians, that is regulated by the state. They're a state-run monopoly. They were allowed, I think, like 7 rate hikes last year by CPUC. As you guys know, there are still fire victims who are unpaid, even though PG&E was found liable for manslaughter in Paradise and other fires in California. 2 of the fires we had in Potter Valley, I believe, were attributed to PG&E's failure to maintain their equipment. But even while they were not paying fire victims, they were paying their executives massive bonuses. They were maxing out donations to Gavin Newsom, Jared Huffman, all of these politicians in the state. They were giving huge donations to Gavin Newsom's wife's personal charity, which is like a gender identity charity. They're listed as a producer on 2 of her films for her nonprofit. So the whole thing stinks. So I think the feds intervening is just kind of the last hope for these rural folks in my community where I come from, who just have been consistently ignored by the state government, and especially by, PG&E. PG&E has not been held accountable for the damage that they've caused to this area, especially with fires and failure to maintain their equipment. So there's a little caveat there in terms of government involvement on this one.
Just for, because you brought up the relationship between PG&E and Gavin Newsom, I had to ask Rock. PG&E and its affiliate entities have donated approximately $2.5 million to Gavin Newsom's campaigns, ballot measures, inauguration events, and related political activities since 1998. That does not include the money they gave to Jennifer Siebel Newsom, which received $358,000 from PG&E's foundation. So, yeah, to your point, they've have a cozy relationship, PG&E and Gavin Newsom, and it's, they obviously work together, and it looks like Newsom lets PG&E off the hook whenever there's some sort of wildfire or any calamity that they should be held liable for. One of the things that I found most heartbreaking, I believe you posted this, was the video of the farmer talking about his trees that were like over 100 years old or 110 years old. And how we just lost water Like they just said, we're shutting off water. You don't have any more water. And now he has no idea how he's going to save these 110-year-old trees. Have you talked to people in Potter Valley and gotten like, what's the firsthand account of those ranchers and farmers who basically have no water, and what are they going to do?
Yeah, I was just checking in with some of them before we got on here. That farmer's name is Dan Thornton. I've known him my whole life. He's a fourth generation pear farmer. His great grandfather planted those trees. He's looking to pass that orchard on to his son. Um, and he's still in a kind of holding pattern. The water cuts that started in August are still in place. He is not sure if he's going to be able to get a post harvest irrigation in, which the trees need. You kind of put the trees to bed for the fall. They need that post harvest irrigation to make it through to the next season. So if he doesn't get that water, it's going to really hurt his trees. He said, I think in one of those videos, if he loses water for a year, the trees are dead. And this is just so unnecessary because we had a great winter. California had a great rainy season this year, so we shouldn't be having a water shortage right now. We're not in a drought. This part of California is not in a drought. This is a man-made drought. So yeah, it's really heartbreaking, and a lot of folks, their wells run dry because they rely on irrigation just to replenish their domestic wells. So yeah, these trees will die if the dams come out. A lot of ranches will have to move hay, operations, domestic hay operations that I used to work on when I was in high school. Those are all going to leave. It will just decimate the area.
And since this area is so central, right, to California's footprint in agriculture, exemplary of it, we had pulled, so USDA does a census of agriculture every 5 years, and we pulled some stats on the latest one. The average um, age of a family farmer in California is 59. And that's actually a stretch from the previous census of ag. And why that matters is, the farmer you saw in that video, he's also thinking about how is he going to pass along his legacy. 70% of California farms are family farms. That's not an accident. They want to continue this great tradition that has been in their families for hundreds of years. How are they going to do that and be able to pass their family farms along if they don't have water, like if they don't have critical inputs that they need? And how are they in good faith going to turn around and tell their sons and daughters this is a great way to earn a living and a livelihood when their state's working against them? So to me, like, it's that one farmer is just exemplifies the problem of like, this isn't just parochial, but like we have to be working on a national level to have a fair playing field to just continue our farming and food security. It's not just unique to California. So anyway, that video spoke to me too, y'all.
It I mean, not to get too broad picture, but I mean, in the larger scheme of this, it baffles my mind that California loves to pretend, oh, we have number one in agriculture, number one in this, and Newsom loves to tout all the farmers in San Joaquin and in these different areas, and the happy cows come from California and stuff like that. Yet behind the scenes, it's like our state government is quite literally just destroying farm after farm and ranch after ranch, and they're just bulldozing these generational farms and ranches. Like we talked about with the Point Reyes ranchers, how long they have been there. Now you have farmers who have been in Potter Valley for over a century, and they're just bulldozing these ranchers and farmers out of the way. And there is no coverage at all. No one's talking about this except for Keely and her blog and us tonight talking about it. Why do you think this just doesn't get brought up? Do you think they need to maybe, I don't know, organize? Is there a way to get this message out that California is just absolutely killing its agriculture, and it seems like it's on purpose? What are your thoughts of why can't we get a message out?
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to that. I've always been so confused by that because to me, this is the California dream. This is the California identity. My great grandparents came to the Central Valley from the Azores Islands. That was their American dream, was working on dairies and And, you know, my dad was the first to go to college. He's a ranch veterinarian. He's been serving the ag community for 40 years. My mom's a veterinarian. Both went to UC Davis, and this is just their livelihood and what they love. And these are the people that I think of when I think of California. I don't think of Hollywood. I think of these hardworking farmers and ranchers who are just totally silenced. And I think anyone who drives between San Francisco and LA, you see those signs about the man-made drought and Gavin Newsom sending their water to the ocean. I mean, farmers and ranchers in this state are really hurting, and they're really screaming for help in any way they can, from billboards off I-5 to, you know, in this case, I've just been taking videos of my neighbors and trying to just share their story because the media won't cover it. I mean, we had some slight regional coverage, but for the large part, this story has been totally ignored, and it affects 600,000 people. It affects um, tribes, it affects rural communities. It does affect Sonoma and Napa, which are important tourist destinations for the state. So it is shocking that this is so ignored. It's very close to Point Reyes, which we've talked about before, another area where we're losing generational farms and ranches. So I don't know if Tate has perspective as someone maybe on the outside looking in as to how bleak it gets here in California, but it's just such an important reminder that we still rely on these men and women to feed us. Less than 2% of Americans work in production agriculture. Your food doesn't just come from the grocery store. These men and women, especially these farms that Tate's talking about, these family farms, this is knowledge that you really cannot regain. I mean, it should be thought of as a natural resource, the way we think of our water and the way we think of our soil. That kind of farming knowledge, the people who have been working this land for generations, who know it, who know the soil, who know the water patterns, who know how to farm, who know how to grow food, they're a natural resource, and I think we're losing them, and it's scary, truly.
Yeah, California seems to have missed the memo that farmers and ranchers are among the original conservationists. I know even the federal government holds that policy to be true. Look, as the non-resident Californian, I can only imagine that it can be a challenge to get stories like these out, which is one of the reasons we're here this evening. So I'm not going to pretend to even know your media market. I can only imagine. But one of the ways America First Policy Institute got connected on this issue was actually not through mainstream media, but was through social media channels. And I think it's something policymakers are paying attention to more. For us in the rural policy space, we recognize that farmers and ranchers are busy working. They don't take vacation. God forbid they even tell their story or pitch it to Fox News or whoever. And so, more platforms like what Keely has developed have become increasingly popular. I don't know if it's like a post COVID kind of infatuation with a wanting to move to a more rural area, be more connected with where your food comes from, a more simple way of life. But whatever it is, there's been a rise to platforms that um, share agriculture's story. And I do think think tanks, policymakers in DC are paying more attention to those just to hear what the word is on the ground. And so when Keely's able, and this platform too, able to spotlight those issues, they are getting noticed. So all the more importance and kudos to her. And I do think that there has been an uptick. I think we saw Secretary Rollins actually got involved, not in this. Well, she's probably taking a look, but in California. But there's another issue in New Jersey with a gentleman named Andy Henry who's fighting his local affordable housing mandate, which is trying to take his farm in a town called Cranberry, New Jersey, and he's going to be subject to an unworkable affordable housing mandate had someone not stepped in. Well, the federal government did step in, and they're exhausting every avenue to try to preserve that sort of family farm. That went viral. Like that took national news by storm just by the willingness to dig in. And I'm pretty sure Andy Henry originally used social media to get federal policymakers' attention. So I do think that there is a moment, and this is the moment in time to be telling these stories to try to get attention outside, if not in California, outside of it, and it is working slowly.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, we've this is kind of a personal anecdote, but my wife and I started eating a lot healthier, and I've gotten to the point where I now care about where my milk comes from in California, and I learned what vat pasteurized is versus raw milk. So I think there is definitely a trend, and I never 10, 15 years ago, you always thought it was the other way around. Like the people who were into like, well, where did my produce come from? Where did my dairy come from? That seemed like a very left leaning hippie kind of thing. And like they always said, like conservatives just ate McDonald's. Um, Now it's almost like flipped in a weird way. Like conservatives care about farms in rural areas and they want to protect them. They're like, well, where's my farm? Where's my food come from? Does it have pesticides? I think RFK is a big part of like that kind of Maha movement. So it is interesting to see the cultural shift. Someone did have a question in the chat. If you guys don't mind me asking, someone said, don't the Pomo Indians have a certain amount of land around Lake Pillsbury? Have they expressed any concerns about this?
Yeah, actually, great question. Power Valley Tribe just filed a motion to intervene in this, which is kind of another interesting part of this whole saga. I mean, I would use the term tokenization. I think that politicians in California like to tokenize tribes when it benefits them. So they've trotted out one tribe that they say, oh, there's tribal buy-in for this dam removal because the Round Valley Indian tribe is in support. But there are many tribes in this part of California. Potter Valley is one of them. I interviewed E.J. Crandall, who is a supervisor in Lake County, but he's also a leader of the Robinson Rancheria Band of Pomo Indians. And he's been very vocal against dam removal, not speaking for his tribe because he is not the chief elder there, but he is a supervisor for Lake County and he cares very deeply about his constituents. And he's been very, very vocal about the importance of the dams to salmon and to these tribal lands. So it's a total mischaracterization to say that all the tribes are in support. Some of the tribes haven't spoken out yet, but uh, Potter Valley did just file a motion to intervene because this person who asked questions, exactly right. They do own land near Lake Pillsbury. This is some of their ancestral land, so they definitely have an interest in what happens to it. And I'm glad to see them getting involved. I think honestly, even the little media attention from social media, folks kind of speaking out about this finally is giving a lot of the community hope. I think that, there's really a sense in a lot of California that nobody will listen to them, nobody cares, they won't be heard, and what's the point of trying? And I mean, it's just kind of a depressed area economically. This is not a wealthy area. Sonoma, Marin, Napa, they have a little bit more, they've got some financial backing and they've got some wealthy residents and tourism. Mendo and Lake Counties, Humboldt, these are areas that are struggling. And anyone who's been there knows these are both some of the most beautiful areas in our state, but they're also really struggling and economically depressed. I think a lot of these people just feel that there's no hope, and our representative, Jared Huffman, has been just kind of trying to portray this as a done deal. Why bother? The dams are coming out like it or not. So, yeah, I think there has been some action lately, which is really encouraging. People are starting to feel like maybe there's a chance at protecting their water.
Sorry, go ahead, Tate. You looked like you had something to say.
Okay. Well, to Keely's point about social media giving them hope, we did just see just north of you in Oregon, there was a rulemaking that a local natural resource department was going to undertake to redefine farm stand agritourism. Something that I know is important to California, just as important north of you in Oregon. And there was an uproar on social media, so much that the governor directed, Democratic governor, a pause, directed that agency to pause that rulemaking. And it wasn't necessarily something covered on national news. It was the outcry from social media. So I think we're trying to take a play from that playbook and apply it to the Potter Valley, certainly.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Like you said, Phil, I mean, a lot of my neighbors in Mendo, it's like half hippies, half cowboys. My connection with organic food, farmers markets, not using single-use plastics is always the hippies, is always like the leftist guys. So I hope they embrace that again. I think that was they were ahead of the game on that. And Oregon coming out to defend their, farm stands, that's definitely positive. We can have a little sense
Yeah,
on the East Coast.
sorry. I was just going to add, I thought you guys are saying exactly what I was thinking. And I think it's very interesting that one of the number one issues in California that our politicians are always pushing on us is climate change. And, we can't go an hour without hearing climate change from one of our politicians. And one part of climate change is they're always pushing on us, buy local, shop local. But how can we possibly buy and shop local if they're going to continue to push all of our food sources out? I mean, do they really want us to have to go to another country, another state to get any sort of produce or meat? Apparently. I mean, I know they would like to push out meat for the most part and push a vegan diet on us, but we still, our produce, we grow some amazing produce all over California. And so I do think it's very interesting that they're climate change, shop local, but we're not going to let you grow local. That's kind of crazy and doesn't make sense to me. And I also just want to point out something that I had found out from a totally different topic, but the state of Wyoming has a population of just under 600,000 people. And this dam is providing water to 600,000 people. But when you account for the food that it's also providing for, it grows bigger, but 600,000 people. So like that's the entire population of a state. Can you imagine shutting off water to an entire state and just being like, figure it out. Sorry. Hope it rains next year. Put out a bucket. Like that's essentially what they're doing here.
100%. Yeah. Yeah, it is wild. The scope is pretty well, especially when you consider we've had these massive million acre fires. I mean, since 2017, we've had two of the three biggest fires in California state history, and Lake Pillsbury was used to extinguish both of them. So after the LA fires, you would think that that would have been a wake up call. But no, I mean, they are truly going to leave us in one of the most fire prone areas in the United States, and certainly in California, without our main water source that we rely on. I mean, it's a disaster waiting to happen. I had neighbors die in the 2017 fires. That was started by PG&E's power lines. It's just it truly is existential for the area and for these people.
And to your point, though, I mean, we have some of the cleanest air, cleanest water. The stats are there in the country, not just North America. And I think over 50% of our fruits and about 35% of our vegetables are already imported, probably from other countries who don't have as strict air and water standards. So, to your point, Camille, if we're trying to be thinking consciously about how we eat, about the environment, this just flies in the face of it. Because then we would have to import even more.
Yeah, it's sort of with we've talked about it before with like oil. Like here in California, we have oil. We choose not to drill for oil, even though there's a ton of it under our feet. So instead, we go ahead and bring it in from foreign countries or third world countries that have to come over on tankers. And who knows what the conditions are like for those working in oil fields or drilling over in those third world countries. They're definitely not like protected by workers' protections. Um, so I this might be a little off base, but so working to stop what's going on, save the farmers and ranchers that are here now. You brought up that what is it? 2% of people are in America are involved in production agriculture, and I think we talked about this on the last show that we're just not we're getting enough people into agriculture, and that's frightening because if we're not producing food, that is an issue of national security overall. Like if we have to rely on other people for food. To both of you, Tate, maybe on the more national and Keely on the state level, is there any movement to try and get people into agriculture? What's the future for those who want to work in agriculture? Do we have a future? Are there people who are going to take over these farms?
Yeah, I would love to hear, Tate. Maybe you have I think it's tough in California because we're just constantly discouraging young people from going down this road. So I think there's some good news nationally. Maybe I know that AFPI recently opened their rural policy center. You guys have been really focused on this, I'm sure.
I mean, to be completely candid, like the name of our policy center is Farmers First. Like I go to work every day thinking about how are we going to keep people farming in my hometown, just like Keely does. I think it's a good sign that you have I don't know how familiar you are with the organization. It's quite impressive, but Future Farmers of America, FFA now. We have a Secretary of Agriculture who I think is the first state chapter leader, if not any leadership rank leader from FFA upbringings. So I think in DC, at least, when the current administration goes to work every day, it's my impression they're thinking what we are, trying to preserve that next generation. I think you're going to see a lot more to come on that subject prospectively. There's already been several policy proposals put out to preserve the next generation of small farms and ranches. I think they put out a policy plan in May. So therefore, it's no surprise when DOI quickly intervenes to try to preserve an area's farmland. And so whether or not it's training, incentivizing rural educators to want to recruit and remain in rural America, improving quality of life in rural America. Like, what does it take to get people to want to stay and take over their family farm? Whether it's through rural economic development, improving quality of life indicators. I think that's a big piece of it you're going to see out of this administration. It's something we think about. I will say, in the One Big Beautiful Bill, Congress just permanently extended the death tax. That is actually like huge for passing along the family farm. So I think you're seeing a lot of policy pieces come together and take sort of a all of the above approach to help revitalize and generate rural prosperity so that we do see a continuation of farming and ranching. I will say farming and ranching, while it might be 2%, the stat Keely threw out, it is still in rural places a top 6 employer. And as you've seen, manufacturers a lot. Rural America doesn't look like it did 250 years ago when our nation was founded. So trying to keep it as a top 6, if not higher than that, employer in rural America.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like, honestly, California, as much as there's a lot of bad news, I think culturally, what you guys are talking about with just kind of the return to people paying attention to where their food comes from, that's a positive. I think that's a huge positive development. People are starting to care about that stuff again. I think, Camila, we were talking last time about just, city homesteading and more people getting chickens in the backyard and kind of just getting interested in where their food comes from again. I think that will only get more kids interested in agriculture as a career path and open up more doors. So I'm optimistic about that. I just worry for California because it does seem like we don't have a lot of folks advocating for us in Sacramento or in DC when they represent us. I remember watching Brooke Rollins' confirmation hearing, and our senators, I think it was it Padilla or Schiff? I think it was Schiff, and his main question for her was something about illegal migrants in California, which, sure, that's a question to ask, but what about the family farms and ranchers you represent as one of our 2 senators? Not a single question about them and their future. So
not a question
not
about
to go
go ahead, Tate.
Oh no, sorry, she inspired me. Not to go like too macro on you all. I do think when you hear news about trade deals, it comes up a lot. We're kind of constantly shifting gears to a new country just because so many seem to be coming to the table trying to renegotiate with the United States. That actually trickles down to recruiting, I think, next generation farmers and ranchers, because they have to have somewhere for their crops to go. We can't just sell in the United States. Yeah, California is a big exporter too. So if they see market signals that their crops are going to have benefits of new trade deals, new market access, to me, that's a carrot, no pun, to want to stay in the family business as well. So just some key policies to think about when you're thinking about recruiting the next generation. Yeah.
And just for everyone, FFA is Future Farmers of America, right?
Yep.
Just so our listener, because I don't know if I grew up in a rural area that did have FFA. So
corduroy jackets, and they turn out some of the most impressive leaders. I wish I had participated. I will admit I was too busy on the horse show circuit, but gosh, everyone that comes out of that program is so impressive.
I remember it was a big thing at our county fair, Future Farmers of America, in our tiny little sparsely populated county in New Jersey, of all places. Real quick, Is there any update on what's going on in Point Reyes for us since you were last here, Keely?
I know that the folks in DC are getting more involved. It's a pretty complicated situation. The more I investigated it, there's just a real pattern of the Park Service doing this to different um, park properties in California, different ranchers in California. I mean, that is truly a land grab. Camille, to your question earlier, there's just this history of the National Park Service coming in, muscling out ranchers. Happened on the Channel Islands. There was some pretty shocking stuff that happened on Santa Rosa Island, on Santa Cruz Island. I reported on that a few months ago. I think it was back in the 90s. They landed in a Black Hawk helicopter to raid this family on Santa Cruz Island, allegedly because they were, you know, taking native artifacts or something. But really, it seemed to be more connected to the fact that the Park Service wanted their land and wanted these folks out. So that is kind of the long macro view of, I think, what happened on Point Reyes. And I think until we have more transparency at the Park Service, I think ranchers should be very worried about partnering with them. The Park Service isn't just Yosemite or Yellowstone. I understand maybe we don't want farms in the middle of Yellowstone, but there's a lot of properties owned by the National Park Service. And I think as we look to domestic supply chain, as we look to the next generation in agriculture, understanding that these federal agencies manage our land for Americans and they manage our natural resources for all of us is an important part of how we should view these park lands. So the partnership that ranchers had at Point Reyes was really beautiful. They had this beautiful regenerative agriculture that was there before the Park Service took over. The fact that they were muscled out really makes no sense. I mean, they used the Thule elk as a reason why the Point Reyes ranchers should go. Elk and cattle like each other. They live very well together. Elk will often follow the cattle around in a pasture because cattle are better grazers, and elk can't graze all of those big grasses that are there on Point Reyes, places like that, which is very ironic because just a little bit north in Lake Pillsbury, another part of the story I haven't really reported on yet, but I'm looking into it. The Park Service or the California Department of Fish and Wildlife is talking about culling 90% of the Thule elk that graze and live near Lake Pillsbury, knowing that they won't have water and they're going to die when the dam goes out. So it's a lot of convenience. I do think that independent producers just have a target on their back, and I think that's what the Point Reyes ranchers experienced ultimately. So that's still in flux. I think some of the ranchers have left. They've moved cattle off. I know that there's still some efforts to help them. I know Tate and AFPI have spoken to some of the ranchers and done what they can to advocate for them. But I do think it's going to require kind of a top-down change in how the Park Service handles ranchers and tenants who are in agriculture. I think since we spoke, there were some emails a journalist named Chris Bray revealed through a FOIA request showing the Park Service celebrating the ranchers leaving. So just showing that this was never an unbiased process. These NGOs weren't just searching for the best outcome for the elk and for the land out there. They were always motivated, and in my opinion, they were always working with the Park Service to get what they wanted here. So long-winded answer to say the problem is still very much there, and I think their fate is still in flux. I don't think they're totally out of hope, but it's a pretty dire situation.
Well, yeah, I asked because I think people also need to know what's going on there, not just, hey, we did an episode on it, and okay, that's the end of it. I want to get your update on it. We have a couple minutes left before we hit 1 hour. Any final thoughts on Potter Valley, on the state of agriculture? I don't know, anything that you feel like you want to comment on. That might be a little bit too broad, but any final comments or thoughts for this evening? Keely or Tate, thank you so much for coming on and joining us, especially Tate out there. What's it, almost like Wednesday morning where you're at, but I guess in your line of work, Your line of work never stops. So thank you so much. Tell us where people can find you or follow you or what you're up to, and give us your final thoughts. And don't all talk at
Tate,
once.
you want to? I feel like I've been talking your ear off here. I was going to let Tate take this one.
I was thinking of my ever-growing X handle. No, and what it's called. So, no, thank you so much for having us. I just want to say, I've been following the chat with your sort of loyal listeners. Couldn't agree more. Farm security is national security. We have a whole effort we've been working on a long time to crack down on Chinese and adversarial ownership of farmland. So, to that end, I would encourage your listeners to go to americafirstpolicy.com to check out some of our prior work there. You can find me on X. I am T Bennett DC. Sounds a little swampy, but I was told not to get rid of the DC because it's identifiable. So here we are. And would just really want to say thank you again for letting us spotlight an issue that we have just been working like so hard to try to find some clarity for these farmers who are desperate and they just want to keep their livelihoods. It's who we go to work for every day. Farmers never stop working, so we don't either, which is why we're here at midnight my time. So
yeah, exactly. Great. Couldn't agree more. I really appreciate you guys having me on to talk about this. I know it's a niche issue, but you guys are always just so great about covering real California stories and California corruption. So I hope your listeners keep following you for these rural issues, because truly I think this is our heritage in California that we sometimes forget because our media doesn't highlight it, but it's so important to who we are. It's so important to our security and our identity and our culture here. So I'm just really grateful to you guys for making time. It's such a rural part of the state, but it just is really encouraging. And I know the farmers and ranchers up there, it means a lot to them. They're all kind of shocked that people care. I tell these little old ranchers, like, your video got 1 million views. They're like, what? They wanted to hear from me. So it really is meaningful to folks who feel like there's no hope on these big existential issues to know that there are Californians who care about them and are fighting for them. This is really pretty bipartisan common sense, in my opinion. So thank you guys for highlighting it. And you can find me at America Unwon, UNWON, everywhere. X, TikTok, YouTube, AmericaUnwon.com, all places. So thank you, Camille and Phil. Appreciate you.
Oh, thank you for coming on and updating us. Yeah, this is a really important issue. And to everyone who's listening and tuning in, you can read more about this at AmericaUnwon.com. You go to AmericaFirstPolicy.org or .com. .com. Sorry. I want to make sure I didn't say .org or .com. AmericaFirstPolicy.com. You can go check out there as well and see what they're up to in support of rural policy. And yeah, this is important. And California has a lot of rural lands, a lot of farmers and ranchers that for some reason we have seemed to have just completely abandoned from the state government's perspective. They just seem to not care anymore. So with that, make sure you go check out Keely and Tate and go follow them for all the rural updates. And as for us, make sure you like, share, subscribe, review. All that stuff helps with the algorithm. And the best thing you can do to support the show that is 100% free is you can share this with someone who will find it interesting. So with that, we'll see you on the next one. Later.
Bye, y'all.